Network Automation Nerds podcast. Hello and welcome to Network Automation Nerds podcast, a podcast about network automation, network engineering, Python, and a whole lot of technology topics. I'm your host, Eric Cho. If you're a fan of Python, you know Python wouldn't be here without its amazing community. Most of us, myself included, we came for the technology, but we stay for the community. It's one of the most open, diverse, and welcoming communities you could find out there, tech or not. But these communities do not happen by magic or overnight. They're built by many passionate and dedicated people. So today on the show, we will be talking to Don Sheu and Brian Ray, two of the top community organizers in our community. And we'll dive into their experiences, stories, and how we too can build meaningful relationship in the tech space. So Brian and Don, thank you for taking the time. Welcome to the show.
Hey, thank you for having us.
Yeah, thanks for having us, Eric. It's great being here.
Yeah, so let's dive right into it. So before we get into talk about community building and PyCascade, Puppy, Don, can you tell us a little bit about yourself? How did you get started in the space? And I mean, we know each other for a number of years, but just for the listener out there, just give us an overview of your origin story. I think.
Yeah, sure. I'll keep it to community building in the Python world. And I've shared with Puppy members before pretty frequently there'd be no Puppy without ChiPy because it was Brian who got me into the Python community. We were actually introduced by the founders of Spot Hero, which is doing really well now. But they had invited me to come and meet Brian and meet the community. And Brian and I just really synced up at that point. And our first project we tried to work on was actually trying to take a group, a team of open source leaders to do a tour of China. And I kind of screwed that up, and I was pretty ambitious about that project and learned a lot about how Fortune 500 company leaders work, which is very different from the open source world.
Yeah, how long ago was that you tried to take a bunch of leaders to China?
Might be 8 years ago, Brian. Have we known each other that long?
Yeah, I think so.
I think it was 8 years ago.
Wow.
Yeah, you remember the lunch, right, Brian?
Yeah, and I know exactly what you're referring to. And I think we invited also like the inventor of Django framework and and some other people. And she didn't realize these other folks were at lunch, and she just kind of stumbled into. I don't know what floor it was of the Sears Tower at the time, but just kind of came into the lunch area, and there's a bunch of people there, and she's like, "Don, come on! I thought we were just having lunch, But it was fine. We were very ambitious back then, with our community building.
Yeah. Well, she knew who Adrian was, which points to her as an executive at United Airlines that she keeps track of stuff like that. But
but no free plane. Don asked her, said, could you give us a jetliner because we want to take a bunch of technologists to China? And she's like, Don, I don't even know how to get myself a seat for free on a jet.
I know that's not true. That's not how United works.
Yeah,
but what was the purpose though? Like, what was the purpose of taking them? Was it for investment purposes, or was it for just general introduction?
Well, we did have a delegate. We did have the Chinese intern. We did have the Chinese delegates come here, and I did speak in front of them about open source.
Mm-hmm.
And I think they either loved me, half the audience, or they wanted to murder me. I'm not sure which, because I don't think they understood the concept really. Maybe Don understood.
Well, that was a sharp crew. I'd given an overview on venture and kind of the evolution of Silicon Valley.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the folks asked a great question, was like, you gave these examples of successes. What about the challenges?
Sure.
Okay. It's not all perfect and rosy. I mean, we're talking about these early stage startups, and most fail. And I was impressed. With that. I mean, for me, being of Chinese descent, I really think that us here as Americans really need to understand China better.
Sure.
And that's kind of really apparent, the past like 24 months or something like that, where, folks are kind of forced to face that and try to understand China better. But I just thought it would be a great opportunity to take folks who have contributed so much, right, in the open source community, folks like Adrian Holovati. I think we were trying to take Harper Reed. He was up for it. He was the CTO of the Obama for America campaign, and interact with engineers at the ground level, right? In a tour of a series of cities in China. The proposal was that United Airlines would give us some of their problems that they wanted to solve, or if they were investigating integrating more open source into their tech operations, just kind of give us those topics. We would workshop it during the flight, hit the ground, propose kind of working on some of these problems. The best thing for engineers or software folks to get to know each other, start coding together, right?
Yeah.
And really get going that way. So I thought it'd be a great way to introduce Chinese engineers to kind of the community.
Yeah, and there was a lot of hackathon type mentalities reaching the mainstream at the time. I remember we did hackathons for Aaron Schwartz, who was someone who also came from the Chicago Python user group, and his brother organized some hackathons around the same time, and it was just in the breadth of it working together seemed to be the cool new thing. It was really like a new way of getting hands-on keyboard, where you're not just in a closet or in your office or somewhere, you're actually doing with someone else. So I think we wanted to bring that idea to China and also give some options regarding the way you use software in general to that community. And so that was the goal. I mean, we never really pulled it off, but I think that we definitely got a lot of people thinking and a lot of interest, and other things spurred out of it.
Yeah, no, Brian's more practical than me, so he was just like, "Well, why don't we just buy our own tickets and go?"
No, okay, so I love it. I think you guys dive right in, but if so for our audience who may not know Brian and Don personally, I just want to preface that with, so Brian and Don were co-founders of ChiPy, which is the Chicago Python meetup group, and that's what Brian was referring to.
Well, I was a member, and
I'm sorry.
Yeah, Brian rolled me in, and I was so impressed with the job he did, really single-handedly, that when I arrived in Seattle, and the preceding Python group wasn't, it was lacking energy, and I just thought that we could do better. So everything Puppy is, it's really thanks to Brian's good example.
Right. So Puppy is the Python's Seattle Python meetup, and ChiPy was the Chicago Python meetup. And I think you guys got into it a little bit, but in your day job and in your background, both of you are very much into entrepreneurship, venture capital, and just kind of this bias for action kind of guy, right? So maybe Brian, you could start out with a little bit about your background and how you got interested into technology, founding companies, and successful exits and all that.
Yeah, I mean, I could speak to the little bit of that. I think more I was on the corporate side than Don was. So I've worked more for places like Deloitte, and I've done consulting and places like that. And that's what I do today. Is I lead a data science team of that'll get up to about 40 direct reports by the end of next year. And so I think that's the difference. Is Don is more entrepreneur thinker than I am, but I'm a very pragmatic type leader in that space. I heard you say earlier that we come for the technology and then we discover the community.
Yep.
I actually did the opposite, to be honest.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So when I was trying to program laser printers, and these are big production size laser printers to personalize direct mail, back when people actually cared about snail mail. I stumbled across a language named PostScript. It's a horrible language. And I used a language.
Oh, come on! The creator just died a few months back.
I'm so sorry to hear that, but I didn't do it. Right. I thought about doing it at the time because it was a horrible language, a stack-based language, and I wanted to do code generation, and I found a language called Java. And I got onto IRC, where Don used to get all of his dates, by the way, in college, and found a community about Java there, and I got some of the worst advice ever. I thought it was a horrible community. And then I started going around the other channels, and there was one from Python, and there's this Dutch guy on there and other people that I know. And they were like, these guys are actually pretty cool. And I'm like, where'd the language come from? We named it after Monty Python's Flying Circus, true story. And it's like, okay, I can hang out here. Maybe the language, So it really was the community that got me. And then the technology, I found out it was pretty darn good after that. I was quite impressed with it. So that's my story. And I used the Python for many years to generate things that went into print. Met Jot Hunter, who did Matplotlib at the same time. So I used his charting technology in print and printed basically every chart you saw in most direct mailers in the country came from that library for a while there, because we were pretty big at the time generating that technology. Sold it to Xerox and went on and did other stuff. That's how I got into Python, ChiPy. That's why I started ChiPy, was to have that community behind me to help me when I needed help, which I did often.
So that was one of your recruiting techniques. So it's like, oh, where can I find more? I don't know. Well, why don't I just start a meetup and they will come?
More than that, even, Eric. It was like, where can I get my answers? It was like, I don't know, this program's not working right. So I'd go to meetups, buy people beer and some pizza, and they got my answers for free, less than a tutor,
That's true. That's true.
Well, I got a couple questions for you, Brian. One is, back in those early days of Python IRC, how prevalent was Guido? Was he pretty active?
I can't remember how active he was, honestly. I know Skip.
I did a count of Twitter followers of language creators, and wow, Guido is way ahead of anybody. The next person who might be closest to him, I think, might be like Brendan Ike. Well, he didn't create a language. Brendan Ike, or Anders Hellsberg, the creator of TypeScript.
Yeah, I don't know if there's a correlation between how social you are and how good you are at creating a programming language, or how outspoken you are. But what I've noticed about the Python community is there's a lot of people with purpose, and that purpose tends to drive, they scratch their own itch with this language, and it drives innovation in a lot of different ways. So I was re-listening to some of our podcasts on, particularly, some of the more recent with Fernando Perez and other people, Travis.
Wow, he was a force, wasn't he?
Well, I love listening to him, and I love to listen to what drives him. That was it's just the passion comes. He wouldn't answer my question of what drives him in the morning. He diverted it, but it was self-evident by everything he did. He's just a very, and that's what's true to a lot of people in the community. That's why the third-party library support is so good, is the people actually care about it, and they do it because it's really a passion for them.
Yeah. The second question I have for you is, actually, just a request, is share how you even got into coding. Because in Puppy, we really tried to emphasize for many years bringing new career folks or career changers into the community, and I think your story would be really helpful for that.
How did I get into writing software? Should I say that I was trying to break into the school system and change my grades, or should I say
we could start with when you dropped out and you started working at the print shop?
Yeah. Well, I don't know if I recommend that entry point, to be quite honest with you. But I think that I think about the people who are getting into data science now. It's kind of the same thing, and maybe even network programming and stuff like that, or Kubernetes and other technology like that. is what they have now, which I didn't have then, is true mentorship. You know, they have a framework or a person or someone or a job or, you know, a goal to get over it. I think that we were lacking that. I think that my job as a bartender in college was a lot more appealing to talk about than, hey, I program computers. It wasn't cool back then, and now it's really changed, where it's actually, wow, this is getting interesting. We can do stuff. So, you know, I don't know if my story is relevant anymore, but Don, why don't you tell me your story of how you got into technology?
Into technology, yeah. Oh, geez. So I got hired into this job out of college that, like my predecessors, it didn't pay much. It was in a law office, but it was kind of a landing point for the scions of these very wealthy families. Like my predecessors' engagement present from their in-laws was a Patek Philippe, which is like a watch. I think the entry level is like 40K or something like that. But it was during a economic turndown, and I think I was a cost-saving move as a twofer, because they needed somebody for the China and somebody for the Korea practice, and I could cover both with translations and all that kind of stuff. But I was translating a business plan for Korea Freetel, which was the biggest mobile phone company in South Korea at the time. It was full of English engineering terms translated into Chinese characters, then transliterated into Korean, that I had asked a college graduate from South Korea to help out with, and they had no idea. And my first co-founder for my startup said, "There's got to be something better than this." And I said, "Yeah, let's quit and let's go do a startup." It was during the dot-com boom, so that's how I got into tech.
Oh, that's interesting.
So I didn't want to translate any more horrible Korean engineering terms that aren't even really Korean.
That was even more so, right? Like that's double the term. It's translated to Korean, then translated to Chinese. And you know, by the time on I don't know, the third pivot, you kind of lost the meaning of everything.
Yeah. Well, they should have just kept it in English.
Sure, why not? You know, like I think just a couple of days ago, we were on this conference, and people were talking about you know, writing, and they were talking about blogging in different languages. And just so happened last year, I actually translated my book into Mandarin. So I offer my advice, and well, it was basically saying everything should be in English, because you know, when I participated in PyCon Taiwan last year, it was, you know, 2 out of the 3 keynote speakers were in English, so people understand.
Yeah, Peter Wong gave a keynote speech.
That's right. He was one of them, and I think, gosh, the a core contributor with Asian descent, like Japanese American, Japanese Canadian, I think. So she gave another keynote. So I think in general, people understand that. In order to be compatible, you start with English, but you could always, you know, go back and translate if needed be. So that was the lesson I took, and that was the advice I gave. It was just like, yeah, you know, people don't mind. It's in English. It's almost like a bonus that it's in, you know, their native tongue, but they don't mind it's in English. And I don't know how it was in China. I mean, I'm still kind of hung up on your trip in China. It's like, what made you guys think to just like pack up and, you know, like hammer it out, do a hackathon over thousands of miles, right?
Not only did he want to do a hackathon 1,000 miles, he wanted to do it on the plane.
You know, yeah, exactly.
Plane and do it on the plane while we were going from city to city. So Don operates on a different dimension sometimes, which I always appreciate about him. That's why we get along so well, I think. But yeah, so Don, I don't know where you came up with the idea, but it was a good one. I think maybe one of our first conversations was, man, I really want to hang out in China more often. And you're thinking, oh, how we can get there the hardest way possible. You know, bring 100 of our closest friends on a airliner.
That gives a new meaning to be the change you want to be. It's like, okay, I want to go hang out in China. So like you said, what's the hardest way that we could take? How is the hardest route we could take to get there?
Well, I see it as the most fun way.
Okay. elaborate, Don.
No, I mean, it's a lot more fun that way. I mean, being another schlep on the plane, flying there and doing what any other tourist does or whatever, it's far different than having a purpose and being around great people with a similar purpose. And it's about community, right? I mean, that's the great thing about community is when you come together with folks, they don't have to see the world exactly like you do, but there's enough references that it's meaningful and you can have a very fruitful conversation about something rather than talking about the sports scores. I mean, I like true. Sports too, but
yeah. No, I think that's a great point that you just brought up, and it kind of ties back into our kind of our objective today, right? So if I have the same idea, and if I were to say Taiwan, for example, that's where I'm from, and if I go to Taiwan, I couldn't pull these people together, right? Even if I have the same idea, have the same drive. So what you mentioned was,
I think Ava Airways was probably far more receptive than a traditional old line American carrier.
Sure, I could buy the seats, but I couldn't get them to agree to go on a flight with me for 14 hours, and then
I think we should try. We should talk to somebody.
It's never too late,
We should talk to somebody. I mean, Ava probably wants to upgrade their software too.
That's true.
It's a quality organization too. It's a high quality airline with great service.
And United's going to be kicking themselves. You're like, man, we should have done this.
That's true. Maybe the post-COVID world, we could probably attempt to do it, and maybe we all get upgraded to first class or whatnot just by solving their issue.
Yeah.
But so you mentioned it's much more fun to have a single purpose and to kind of drive toward that thing. So how do you communicate that purpose? Because I think you've had the quote of saying you never wrote a line of code, but you've been hosting the puppy meetup for 2 years or something like that, right? Something along that line. So which is amazing by itself. So so that must be something else, right? I mean, you could be a great tech leader like Guido, who's awesome at writing code, and people follow him by his example. But how do you basically not a developer, but also motivate developer for that single purpose?
Yeah, well, I mean, I like being around problem solvers. I think that's the thing about with our fund, for example, when we're going to market, and some folks who aren't even in the open source community and talk about how we're emphasizing founders from the open source community, they say, well, where's the business? How are you capturing the value? Or how are you getting paid for this? And, the thing people miss is about open culture is there's this way that people are organized and how they get work done that's very effective, and I appreciate that. And what people have to understand is these are folks who really pay attention to their users, which is other developers. They have to have some sense of empathy or real understanding of the problem, and those are great people to be around. It's just a lot of fun.
Yeah. What about you, Brian? What do you think about, how do we pull people together? Because as in a leadership role, I bet you kind of give some thought to that as well.
I mean, it's in my job description, literally. And I did it last night. I pulled 300 people together for rooftop drinks last night, which is usually a bad idea before a podcast, but I made it here. But how do you get people off of the couch and to participate is really the larger question there.
Yep.
And if they're in a volunteer situation, or if they can be involved in some way, that usually gives them a reason to be there. The thing that I really made me successful with ChiPy was not taking ownership all the time, kind of eventually bringing other leaders in to lead special interest groups, to take ownership to it, to find a place to belong. But everyone has a different reason for being there too. Sometimes they like to be on a fly on the wall, and sometimes they like to get their feet wet at getting in front of people and speaking, which is not a natural trait. Soft skills are not always a natural trait for engineers. So, it really gives you some dexterity in order to belong to an organization. But whenever you're talking about membership organizations or member organizations, even if you don't have to pay for it, a sense of belonging and having common interest goes a really long way. If it's something that you're really interested, you'll find people who generally don't engage people very often or very well sometimes, and all of a sudden light up and start talking about, hey, I really like network interfacing with Python. I really want to look at this library. They'll start talking about it. You'll see them more engaged because they have that common thread.
Yeah. I mean, one thing I shared with Puppy members about networking is the secret is we as human beings are essentially lonely, and we're all looking for connection because we're also wired that way. And then the other thing that I shared with Puppy members was most everybody in the room are working in professions where those closest to them just don't even understand what their job means or what they do. And that being in a room full of people who don't have that kind of a membrane of understanding them gives them the opportunity to perhaps find their best friend, because maybe, they haven't met their best friend yet.
Yeah, I think those are good points. It's kind of, you want to find a common thread between people, and however that is, because as Brian, you were saying, people come to the group for various different reasons. And it was important for the organizer to kind of recognize that and delegate the relationship sometimes to those other people so that they could be the connective tissue for its members.
Yeah, and it also can, if moving too quickly, it could cause the destruction of user groups too. So the other thread at it. Here's the secret. I ran Chicago Python user group arguably for 14 years. Towards the end, I was less engaged, but the reason it lasted, and a lot of meetups don't, was things like having a really good, consistent messaging, really good, strong, reliance on what day it's going to occur, dependability and things like that. So if you break it up and divide it too much too quickly, then you're going to run into the threat of it, cannibalizing itself. So it's better to kind of crawl, walk, run with it, so that if you're organizing groups, you give a little way, you give people chances, but you also have enough, strategy around it in order to bring it back home and be able to have a larger group and organize that way. So there's a lot of that thinking going on regarding how you grow a group and how you keep people engaged and how it moves over time. People's interests move over time, the language moves over time, the tech industry moves very quickly, sometimes in one direction or not, and then it hits the hype curve and people just get disenchanted with little pieces of the technology, and then they come back to it. Like blockchain is a perfect example of that. Some of the ChiPy members, we were really interested in blockchain earlier on, and then we were like, oh man, this community is not what it used to be, and we got out of it and then we got back into it. So it happens. It really
missed out on a lot of money there.
Yeah, or I have it sitting on some drive somewhere in my closet. It's a perfect way to get my house broken into, saying that. So I didn't.
Yeah, right. And speaking to that regularity, we really took that to heart. Dusty Phillips, who co-founded Puppy with me, he had referred to another great organizer, Ned Batchelter's notes on organizing about regularity, and I think we never canceled one of the monthly meetings until there was a severe weather event in Seattle where it was just frozen, and the venue was going to be in Redmond at the Microsoft React Center, and just wouldn't have been safe for people to travel and things like that. So the regularity is definitely very important.
I'm always jealous of the success Don had at Puppy, to be honest with you, because I feel he largely was a more successful user group than mine in some ways. But then I also blame it on the weather. I mean, if it rains every day, I don't know how you guys handle it, but if it rains every day, that's why you get great music coming out of there, art and programming and technology and coffee. I mean, come on, it has to be the rain. It couldn't be Don's skill.
Could be there.
Maybe
there's a lot of engineers in Seattle.
a lot of engineers staying indoors too, right? Because of all the rain and the depression.
Which comes first, the rain or the engineers? Maybe it rains.
See, I grew up in Seattle. I mean, we just walk in the rain. There's no umbrellas.
There's just clouds that follow you around sometimes. Engineers so pragmatic and like realistic about things. Like, oh man, I gotta go work at my job at Amazon. Oh man, rain follows you. Blah blah blah. I guess I'll program something today. I don't.
Right. Yeah. No. I mean, when I grew up in Southern California, where you're close to where you're at, Brian, right now. But when the first time I came to Seattle, it was like, why are these kids playing soccer in the rain? And then of course
we don't care.
Yeah, they don't care. They find out like, so I think the coach told me if they don't play in the rain, that if that's a guidance, then they would never finish the season, right? It would take like 10 years to finish one season, just because it rained so much. But it wasn't just like light drizzle, right? It was like pouring rain, and the kids were just running, having a good time. So that was a bit of a shock to me. But as someone who grew up in the Seattle area, that's just Tuesday, right, Don?
Yeah, it doesn't matter. Nobody owned a umbrella back in the day. You just walk out in the rain.
That's right.
I think Chicago has some times where it gets cold and and it snows and the roads are disgusting, but people still came out, and those are kind of arguably more interesting people that are more really that into it, that you're gonna go anyway. But then again, if you know me, I like to have the big outdoor rooftop party in the sunshine and on a Saturday afternoon too. So I can see both sides of the coin there. There's different communities that come out for stuff for sure.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, I mean, Brian, you were so identified with Chicago that there was kind of an uproar when you relocated to Southern California.
Yeah. What's up with that?
I got a lot of heat on that one. So I was, pretty much Chicago. I'd be going to Southern California for some of my clients, and I kind of fell in love with it. And I think it's been drawing me in for many years. I looked at going to school here at one point, even, and when I was younger. So it's been drawing me for a while. And eventually my life just was, what, I can make the move. I'm going to move down to Southern California, and I don't regret it for a moment. But the Chicago scene was very, they were the community that you organized. It was kind of a, I don't know, Darth Vader sort of situation, if I can make an analogy, is or some other, teacher, guru, situations where you end up, whatever. But, and I don't know, I don't know if the community is going in a direction that I'm always proud of sometimes, even the Python community in general. I mean, sometimes I think it is, and sometimes I don't think it is. I've been to some PyCons, I'm like, meh, we did better. But maybe it's just me getting older and grumpier too, but when we brought it to Chicago, or we had it in early days, to me, it did feel like a stronger community. And then, but I see it again reoccurring in smaller doses and smaller pieces. So I can't say, oh, the whole community is going to hell. I'm not going to say that, but I will say that it certainly does change, and it poses its own growth problems and things like that. It's not an easy thing to do. It's a lot of work, and it's a lot of fixing stuff, a lot of listening, and a lot of being able to, make sure that people are happy. But I don't envy them at all. But yeah, I'm out of that leadership, and I've been trying to build community down in Southern California now, not just tech, but also art and other things. So I've been really focusing on taking some of what I learned there and trying to reapply it to different industries. And I think it applies. I think it works. I think, people want the same thing deep down. They want a sense of belonging. They want to contribute. They want to know people. They want to be known. So those same premises are there.
I think my focus now is really creating a community of founders like Yuri, who maintains Async.io and is the founder at EdgeDB. Elvis, there's Matt Rockland, who was on the podcast with Hugo, and Peter Wong, Travis, and also be a service provider for them, finding them capital and helping them grow, and finding them their right hires and all that. So I'm focusing on that. But I think the other thing also is, I think, Brian, you and I've talked about this. I know Steve Holden, who founded PyCon and founded the PSF, we've talked about how much we admire NumFocus. Just
yeah.
I don't know if that's Travis and Peter coming from a background of building up a business, but the board is got diversity in it in terms of the professional roles that people fulfill during their day jobs, that they have this great support system for the local organizers. Like, for example, my friend Eloisa put on PyData Seattle for 2 seasons, and then she came on board to help out with PyCascades, and she was like, well, isn't this already taken care of? I go, no, we got to do this all. And she was like, but for PyData, NumFocus has a dedicated staff person who helps the local organizers. So
yeah.
Like, wow.
Well, there's something interesting about all those names you just mentioned. First off, they all do contribute to the open source community, but they also have their own thing now. So it's really interesting to me, those names. It's interesting watching how they've developed not only to community leaders, but now business leaders in a lot of senses. And, and I think it takes a little bit of both. And they've been all involved with conferences as well, and speaking and being very vocal. So there's some characteristic about people who are successful in that space that seems to be common with all those names you just now mentioned. And I run into them a lot, even on the business side. I run into them a lot. So, they're doing something right, and I think there's a whole something that can be learned about how they operate as humans.
I mean, if you're coming from an open source project and creating a business, I mean, it's amazing what Coiled has been doing with their outreach and being available and just very transparent with the community.
I agree. I couldn't agree more.
Higo's done an amazing job with the content, the regularity of it, the relevant guests they bring in, and they're agnostic too. I mean, they just don't care if it's particularly conducive to Coiled's business. It's just so focused on the recipient and helping people solve problems, and which is great.
And DASK benefits from it. I sent my whole team through DASK training through Coiled, and but we paid for it. We paid for it, asked for that professional touch, but it's worth it to us because it's a really competing type of technology that's going to change things. So I mean, there's real purpose behind all of this, but I appreciate their business and their outreach, and it's amazing how engaged they are with both the business community and the tech community, and I look up to them for that.
Yeah, and I think Coiled is really poised to really benefit again from the open source community. I mean, like Guido is going to be concentrating on improving the performance of Python at Microsoft, completely subsidized by one of the great tech giants. I think a few minutes yesterday was the highest value enterprise in the world, past Apple for a few seconds. And that's going to benefit a great founder, Coiled, I think. And then who else is, Peter and Anaconda. They're working so hard on performance in Python. They hired the whole Piston team from Dropbox, for example. So it's going to be this kind of virtuous circle of open source leaders who are also in business that are reinforcing each other.
Well, and the old school open source community, we would not have accepted the risk that they're taking now, doing stuff like partnerships with Snowflake, which is Anaconda's doing now, or just the ties to Microsoft. I mean, we didn't love Microsoft back in the early days.
Different place now.
Yeah, it's a different place, and it's a different perception too. It's a different perception, and when you have these leaders that you've kind of grown up admiring, knowing, being friends with, and also watching them build their businesses, you're like, okay, well, if you like it, and you can accept it, you can make a good relationship with these folks and make them not be evil. Well, maybe we should accept them too. So they really can change. They're powerful enough to change the tides.
Yeah.
But they're also they tend to all be very outspoken about a lot of things, and it feels awesome that we can all live in a community and speak our minds. We can wear many hats. We can be, fathers and businessmen at the same time, and community leaders,
or mothers too,
and mothers as well. And that's another thing, is there's a greater diversity that I'm seeing on my own team that I'm building, but there's also greater diversity in the community. There's also some real strange things about that too that seem to be it seems to go against itself at times. So that's one of the big challenges right now, is trying to find those identities again, and be able to be diverse but also be friendly and all that.
Yeah. Well, I think the Python world does a really good job focusing on gender diversity. I hope we can do a better job on other diversity. I mean, I know we've been very supportive of trans issues, for example, and including having Naomi Cedar, who was a active ChiPy member at one point, as the PSF chair. But I mean, wow, you show up to PyCon and we could use a lot of other diversity too.
Yeah, well, there's ways even that can go well and ways that can go wrong. And it's these are tricky things, like I said, in growth. And there's times where I look at the community and I'm like, what have we become? And then I look at the community on another day, I'm like, wow, look at what we've become. And those are really two different things. Is where I'm really proud, and sometimes, and I'm like, oh, we really went in the wrong direction in this sense. And now we have to come back. And how do we get into this state where we're arguing about some of these things where we really shouldn't be? How do we get over that argument? How do we recover from it? It feels like we all need to be in group therapy now, but there's too many people to put in one room.
Well, I told puppy members that we'd be healthiest when I was unhappy about most everything about puppy. And it just wouldn't matter either. Because at that point, it meant that the community had really formed it and it was their own and they owned it.
I think that's very interesting, right? I mean, just listening to you guys about the growth and how a group matures. But with maturity, of course, that came different directions, different opinions. And you yourself, goes through different phases in career and in life. So, but the point about open source maintainers as well as business leaders, that's a good combination for building communities. That's a new insight to me. Of course, I've thought about, I've learned their growth, and also, I follow them on, what kind of initiative they do, but I never thought about the kind of combination that would drive them to be successful. And those are the same traits that could help you building communities. And because, in an open source community, you're not motivated by money, right? So it must be something else that glues you together and motivates you to spend your time, spend your otherwise valuable, time with family and members, and to do something.
No, there's other incentives, but they're the most important incentives because it's a human incentive. Because in the open source community, when you stand out, you've really contributed something, right? You've really delivered some service to people and it's useful for them. And either they earned more money or they got a job through mastering this particular piece of technology somebody has created, or like the language creator event that I had put on for Guido, which was supposed to be honoring his retirement.
I remember that.
Backtracked on that one. But the consistent thing of the different language creators was that one of the things that most affected them was when somebody thanked them for their livelihood.
Right.
And I think it's also time now that we're trying to figure out how these people get rewarded for that financially as well, because I think we're starting to understand that these communities that exist in kind of this system with capitalist rewards, they need the funds, right? They need the money. I have constant anxiety of the PSF and where their financial footing is. And it's just amazing what NumFocus does. I saw their annual report recently, and their revenue is through the roof. I mean, they've done such a great job on making sure that they can maintain that organization and support the important projects that they provide service to. And I think it's now time for these people who create really valuable software, like Matt Rockland with, Coiled, that they get the financial rewards. And I have very high confidence that they'll contribute back, because they understand that value.
I mean, it's a big problem, right? Because nobody's saying, hey, I want to, I live to breathe, but if you can't breathe, you can't really live. So it's so I think it's a bigger problem. And there are a number of the podcast episodes on either Talk Python or some maybe on your podcast, AI podcast as well, that discuss this particular issue, because that, obviously you've been thinking about it and been working on the issue.
Yeah. I think it's time. It's time for them to get financial remuneration, and I think they will invest it back into the community as well. And they can create vastly valuable corporations or companies or whatever, what have you, that have the financial means to do that. I think the last valuation of Databricks was $30 billion.
Right.
Yeah. And that's the creators of Spark.
Yeah. I mean, I think Elastic or Kafka, all of these projects are kind of following that model where they don't make money from the software themselves, but they do for like hosted service, or they do it for consulting, education, training, and all that. But back to your original saying about just these creators, they should be rewarded somehow for their time and effort and money, of course. So I know we're coming up a little bit against time because we started a little bit late, but I still feel, we have a lot to discuss. These has been really valuable information to me, both, about how to build community, about how to drive motivation and leadership skills and all of that. So I thank you very much, Don and Brian, for being here. Really appreciate it.
Hopefully we made some sense.
No, it was interesting. I think it was just it was fun to just capture you guys' conversation. That's often how I feel when I'm in like puppy meetups or PyCascade. It's just like, man, these are just really interesting conversation, but how do I capture this so more people could hear about it? So this was definitely
we talk all the time, and I think we have interesting conversation, but we really want to hear from the listeners. We really, we put up I put up my Twitter and email, and I really want to hear from the people out there, what their feelings are about some of these topics, because, Don and I, in the end, we're retired to some degree on some of these items, and we want to see the next generation pick up the reins and bring Puppy back and bring ChiPy back to life. So we want a legacy, but it's easy for us to chat all day long. We're friends.
That's awesome, because you just answered my next question, which was any call to action. And obviously, they both, as Brian mentioned and as Don alluded to, that you guys want to hear people's thoughts and what they feel about this, and kind of mentor. I guess you guys are open to mentor the next generation of leaders. Sure. Who wants to restart Puppy or ChiPy or the next great Python meetup.
Well, I think the consistent thing I found with building Puppy up to 10,000 members, and you've been to some of the monthly meetings, we have as many as
absolutely
250 people in the room,
Yep.
is that most everybody could use more self-confidence. So I think you all can do it. You just got to decide to do it.
I have to say, when I show up, I was very nervous because I was new to Python. I was this network engineer guy who doesn't know anything about coding. And Don was the first person to came by and say hi. And he actually told somebody else to come by and say hi to me too. So that definitely built up my confidence. And I thank you for it. That it made me feel welcomed. And of course, so
I'm glad I did my job.
Yeah, cool. Well, thanks again, guys. Thank you, Brian. Thank you, Don.
Thank you.
All right. So thanks for listening to the Network Automation Nerds podcast today. Find us on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, and all the other podcast platforms. Until next time, bye-bye.
See ya.
See you, everybody.